I'm 81 years old, and I'll tell you something strange. Most of the problems that used to follow me around for decades didn't disappear because I finally figured life out. They disappeared because I stopped making them. For most of my life, I believed something was wrong with the world, with the economy, with other people, with how unfair everything seemed compared to how hard I worked. I carried that feeling quietly, like a weight I assumed every man was supposed to carry. From the outside, my life looked fine. I worked. I stayed married. I raised my kids. I didn't fall apart in public. But inside, everything felt harder than it needed to be, like I was constantly bracing for something, even on good days. It took me a long time to admit this, but about 90% of my problems came from the same handful of habits I refused to let go of. Not because I didn't know better, because they felt familiar. And familiar can feel safer than change. These 5 lessons didn't make me rich or wise or peaceful overnight, but they removed most of the unnecessary damage I was doing to my own life. Quietly, daily, without realizing it. The first one was the hardest to swallow. I spent years arguing with reality. I argued with my body when it got tired. I argued with time when it moved too fast. I argued with my job, my limitations, my past, and especially with people who were never going to become who I wanted them to be. When I worked at the port in Baltimore, I complained constantly about the cold, the heat, the hours, the supervisors, the weight on my back. Every day felt like a personal insult, like life owed me something better than what I was getting. One night, after a long shift, I sat with an older dock worker named Frank. I talked. He listened. I complained for a good 10 minutes straight. When I finally stopped, he looked at the water and said, "Walter, the ocean doesn't care if you're mad at it." That sentence irritated me more than any insult ever could have, but it stayed. Reality doesn't negotiate. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't soften because you're frustrated. Most of my stress didn't come from what was happening. It came from refusing to accept what was already true. Once I stopped arguing with facts and started dealing with them, life didn't suddenly get easier, but it got quieter. And quiet gives you room to think. The second lesson cost me relationships. I liked being right. I didn't think of it that way at the time. I told myself I was just honest, just logical, just unwilling to lie to keep the peace. But the truth is, I enjoyed winning arguments more than I enjoyed understanding people, especially at home. Eleanor noticed long before I did. There were arguments where I technically won and she technically lost, and somehow we both walked away worse. I didn't see the pattern until much later. One evening we argued about something small. I don't even remember what it was. I just remember the silence afterward, not anger, not shouting, just distance. That kind of quiet that feels heavier than noise. Later she said calmly, "You'd rather be right than be close." I didn't respond. I didn't know how. That sentence followed me for years. Being right doesn't build anything. It just ends conversations. Once I stopped treating every disagreement like a courtroom, my relationships didn't magically improve, but they stopped slowly bleeding out. The third lesson came from disappointment I created myself. For a long time, I expected people to show up for me in ways I never clearly asked for. I expected loyalty without communication, understanding without explanation, support without vulnerability. When it didn't happen, I felt let down, sometimes angry, sometimes betrayed. But the truth is, no one had promised me what I was expecting. Most people are busy surviving their own lives. They're not villains. They're not selfish monsters. They're just human. I learned that far too late. Once I stopped expecting people to rescue me emotionally, something strange happened. I stopped resenting them, and when someone did show up, it felt like a gift instead of something I was owed. That alone removed a lot of bitterness I didn't even realize I was carrying. These 3 lessons didn't feel powerful when I learned them. They felt uncomfortable, like admitting things about myself I'd rather not admit, but they cleared space. And space is important when you've lived long enough to know how heavy life can get. The 4th lesson came from work, which is fitting, because work took more from me than anything else. For a long time, I believed my value came from how much I could endure, how long I could stay, how tired I was willing to be. I wore exhaustion like proof that I mattered. If I was worn out, at least I was useful. I saw this thinking everywhere at the port, men destroying their bodies and calling it pride, bad backs, bad knees, bad hearts. We didn't talk about it much. You just showed up and kept going. That was the culture. If you stopped, you were weak. If you complained, you didn't belong. When I became a night security guard later in life, the work was quieter, but the mindset followed me. I still believed rest had to be earned, that slowing down meant losing worth. Even when my body was clearly asking me to stop, I told myself I'd push a little longer. What nobody tells you is that work will take everything you give it. And when it's done with you, it won't remember your name. It won't remember your sacrifices. It won't remember how many dinners you missed, or how many times you came home too tired to talk. I missed moments I can't name now, not because they weren't important, but because I wasn't present enough to notice them. My kids grew while I was tired. My marriage aged while I was distracted. I thought I was being responsible. I didn't realize I was also being absent. Work is necessary. It puts food on the table. It keeps the lights on. But when you let it define who you are, you're setting yourself up for a quiet kind of loss. The kind you don't notice until there's nothing left to give. The 5th lesson didn't come slowly. It hit all at once. I used to believe there was always more time, more chances to say things better, more opportunities to fix small cracks before they became permanent. Later felt responsible, sensible, like planning instead of avoiding. Then Eleanor got sick. At first, it didn't feel real. We talked about appointments, treatments, schedules. We stayed practical. That's what we were good at. I still believed there would be time afterward, time when things went back to normal, time when we could slow down. There was a moment, I remember it clearly, when she was sitting quietly, and I almost told her something. Nothing dramatic, just something honest. Something I had carried for years and assumed I could say any time. I didn't say it. I told myself there would be another quiet moment like that. There wasn't. That's when I learned the hardest truth of all. Time doesn't forgive hesitation. It doesn't care how busy you were. It doesn't care that you meant well. It doesn't care that you plan to do better next week. It only remembers what you actually did. After she was gone, I replayed small moments over and over, not the big ones, the ordinary ones, the conversations I rushed, the evenings I chose silence over presence, the times I thought being there physically was enough. Grief doesn't just come from loss. It comes from all the things you assumed you could delay. Once you understand that, something shifts. You stop treating important moments like they're renewable. You stop assuming people will always be available. You stop saving honesty for later. You don't become reckless. You become intentional. These 5 lessons didn't make my life easier. They made it clearer. And clarity removes a lot of unnecessary suffering. I stopped arguing with reality. I stopped needing to be right. I stopped expecting people to save me. I stopped letting work define my worth, and I stopped pretending time was patient. When I did that, most of my problems lost their power. Not because life became gentle, but because I finally stopped pushing against things I couldn't change and neglecting the ones I could. At my age, you don't get many illusions left, and honestly, that's a relief. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Life isn't complicated. We are. We create tension where none is required. We delay what matters. We protect our pride at the cost of connection. If you're younger than me, and statistically you are, you still have room to do this differently. Not perfectly, just differently enough that you don't look back wondering where the years went. I don't say these things because I have answers. I say them because I finally stopped running from the questions, and that fixed almost everything that was broken.